You have put yourself in a first century mindset. You've come out of a Hasmonean dynasty that is somewhere right around the 130s BC. You've experienced 100 years of independent Jewish rule. Guys like Judah the Hammer and Judas Maccabeus are leading your nation. And you've experienced the victory of this, you've experienced the freedom of this, but the dynasty becomes corrupted, gets in bed with Rome. Rome under Pompey and Julius Caesar are fighting over this area. And from the mid-70s forward, this becomes Roman occupied. Somewhere around 6 AD, so we're talking about the reign of Augustus Caesar, the nephew of Julius Caesar, who was Octavian before that, if you've read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, is the emperor. And this city is a Roman port city where life operated much like it would in Rome, but it's in the Holy Land. If you're from a quiet fishing village and you come here, this would be shocking to you, the same way that it is to a conservative Christian when you go to Las Vegas and see flyers for prostitutes like buying a hamburger. And we want to read Exodus 20 and talk about that. And I should probably tell you before we walk into this amphitheater that one of the unique markers of Caesarea is this is where the Pilate inscription was found. So from 6 AD forward, what happens is this is where the procurator, a guy like Pontius Pilate, would have had his corporate headquarters, even though Jerusalem is the larger city. And he has his headquarters here because this is where your trials and stuff takes place. So this is the judicial branch is here. The first thing that God reveals to Moses on Mount Sinai pertains to these statues. Somebody read Exodus 20, just start to read in verse 1.
And God, go ahead.
And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments.
When you're thinking about a command like that, when you travel through Jewish sites, you might see fruit. You'll see occasionally a four-footed animal like a gazelle. What you do not see are statues of men, especially not naked men and naked women. And the reason for that is there's a respect for man who is made in the image of God. And to walk into this city and the first thing that you're faced with is this kind of thing shows the clash of cultures that is happening in this time. Men who so respected what God had said to Moses that they wouldn't do something like this. And Romans who saw absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's a decoration. That gets much worse as we go into the amphitheater. Inside the amphitheater, it was not uncommon. There's a whole class of boys called catamites that, their job, just like you would go get popcorn at a football game, is to provide sexual favors to people. They're slaves, and that's their job. How difficult that must have been for a Torah-observant young man. And yet, you're going to see in the book of Acts, this is one of the first places that we see the Holy Spirit break out in new ways. It's a place where all missionary journeys were launched from.
Man.
And they took on the evil of their day, and they overcame it. And this is an important distinction. We say the Holy Spirit, and it's a title. In Hebrew, it's Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of holiness. When they saw the spirit of the world, they confronted him with the spirit of God's holiness.
Amen.
They let the contrast speak for itself. They let the fruit speak for itself. Here, you know, we have full-blown naked statues that apparently somebody wanted a souvenir and brought it home or something. And a Jew would not deface the image of man who is made in God's image by making these kind of things. This will bring a whole new light to the way that we even see the creation. That an artist might not make a statue of David because nobody could make a David like the one that God made, and that God intended there to be a uniqueness in that, a reverence for the unique image of God that we were meant to carry, not meant to set up as pillars somewhere. As we go into this amphitheater, the ancient thespians, the actors and stuff of their day, they did exactly what Hollywood is doing. They took common social themes, they used them as propaganda to pervert the masses. So God sent men like Philip to this city to turn it upside down, saying, there is an image in the heavens that you have failed to understand. We are carriers of that image. We are carriers of that message. And you'll feel the difference in the spirit coming out of us versus the spirit of this place. And the contrast was so stark that it caused revival. It's a message to us about how stark the contrast must be, and the reverence that we have to have for the image that the Lord shows us. We live in a time where the gospel is being marketed in worldly ways. Most churches wouldn't think a thing about putting life-size football players to images to attract people to their Easter celebration. You know, one pastor in our church came from a church where they had 10 times their normal attendance on a Sunday because Tim Tebow came. Now, you can see pictures of the buses, like tour buses, leaving when the gospel presentation starts. They came to see Tim Tebow. And this is all justified because look at the crowds, and they get a chance to hear the gospel, except they're not actually hearing the gospel. And next year, what do we have to do? Drop elephants from airplanes? I mean, if Jesus being raised from the dead, if the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit is not enough, then you have to ask yourself, what would be, and what are you drawing them with? And how dangerously close is it to the way the spirit of the world operates? When we walk into this amphitheater, it is not Ephesus. Ephesus is way to our north in the modern day area of Turkey, but the amphitheater is similar to Ephesus. The amphitheater there is 4 or 5 times the size of this one. This is where the whole city gathered in unison and shouted, "Great is Artemis, goddess of the Ephesians." And the idol makers who made things like this thought Paul was destroying their lives because of the gospel that he was preaching. Now, when we walk in here, again, you're not in Ephesus, but it would not be hard to imagine the same spirit that wanted to tear apart the purveyors and preachers of the gospel. And that's the clash between the spirit of the world and the spirit of the true faith. We need to be careful that it doesn't contaminate what we do. We're already building stadiums that look like these amphitheaters and calling them churches. And the people are not the church in that scenario, the building is. And you don't go meet with the church, the people, you go to the church. Well, nowhere in the Newer Testament is a building ever called a church, ever. Not at any time. The church is the people. These kinds of corruptions take us from the spirit that is the Ruach HaKodesh to the spirit of the world. And that gets pretty clear here. As we move from the amphitheater, and we're going to stop and read passages in the amphitheater of what happened in Caesarea and the way that the city was turned upside down for the gospel, we're literally going to go to a courthouse where they intended to put the apostles on trial. And the apostles actually put their way of life on trial because they had the judgment of God in their hearts. We tend to believe that people don't understand the truth. Romans makes the claim that they do,
Yeah.
that they're simply suppressing
Yeah.
it. It is our job, through the contrast of the image of heaven that we carry and the image of the world they do, for them to see and feel the judgment of God so that they want to be saved from it. This is another great corruption in our time. We think that it is our job to make sure that they feel loved. And because they feel so loved, they'll just be drawn. No, they don't know what they're being drawn to or away from. This is what's wrong with praying for people to be healed but not addressing their true malady, sin. This is what's wrong with telling people the Lord loves you before they understand in any way that their life is actually an offense to God. Now, I'm not talking about being mean or legalistic. I'm talking about the most basic commands that came from heaven from the very beginning. We don't do things like this. We don't because we're following an image that's from the heavens. We don't participate in things like what's going on in this amphitheater. When we're here, we're in the world, but we're distinctly not of the world. And it's the contrast that they should see, not that we get along and go along.
Yeah.
We're going to walk through the opening here in just a second, and I just want to point to how similar it is to any of our athletic stadiums. I mean, we have literally followed the exact same archetype. And where we don't have catamites, we do have cheerleaders. We do have those kind of things. And it's the same kind of appeal to the flesh. And we don't see anything wrong with it. We might need to renew a first century perspective. Jews actually went around this city whenever possible because they didn't even want to be tainted by the filth that they felt here. We're going to need to move on. There's a tour coming and we'll go through these doors.